Language learning in a lot of ways is completely ridiculous. If you're putting in like 3 hours a day, any other hobby, that would be an insane level of dedication, right? But in language learning, that's kind of the minimum. Japanese is so hard, and I kind of gained this reputation as one of the best Japanese-speaking Westerners. A lot of people, I think, never even realize this. Learning is what you do in school, when you consciously memorize what words mean, and then there's this other completely different process called language acquisition. A lot of people have an assumption that if they learn something, and then they just apply it over and over and over, they just understand. That's not how it works. Learning and acquisition are totally separate. Learning never leads to acquisition.
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Matt from Matt vs. Japan. Thank you so much for coming and making time.
Thanks for having me here. It's good to be back in Osaka.
Yeah, you used to study here for a while, and this is also where you kind of made a lot of your content on YouTube, where people know you for sharing insights into how to learn Japanese and various methodologies that you follow to kind of achieve a high level of fluency. So we're going to dive into this. But I want to know first, what got you into Japan at the very beginning?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times I wish I had like a easier to explain or like a more wakariyasu story for how I got into Japan, because, you know, some people have like, oh, I got really into kendo or something, right? But I think for me...
You just watched our latest episode, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. But I was a freshman in high school when I first got interested in Japanese and Japan. Up until that point, I had zero interest in anything related to foreign languages or foreign countries. I'd never traveled or anything. And I mean, the direct kind of thing that got me into it was just I started watching anime. And I think something about the fact that when I was a kid, my favorite, pretty much things ever were Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Beyblade. And both the anime and the games and, you know, the toys.
I think we grew up with the same things, yeah.
Yeah, so like, of course, when I was a kid, I didn't realize they were from Japan or they were Japanese, but when I watched anime as a high schooler, kind of connected that, everything I loved from my childhood is from Japan, right? And I think also even like, you know, when you grew up in America as a kid, all of Asia is kind of presented to you as one, you know, homogenous kind of exotic foreign thing. And so even like, I think imagery from like Bruce Lee movies and seeing, you know, Chinese characters at Chinese restaurants and stuff, all that stuff, I think I always kind of, like in hindsight, had an interest in that as a kid of like, what is this mysterious language that seems so foreign and so different? And so I think that combined with that, when I was in high school, I just kind of felt like I didn't really fit in and didn't really like have a group of people that I really resonated with. That kind of part of me was looking for kind of a new identity, some new way to reinvent myself. And when I heard the sound of Japanese, something just clicked and I was like, I want to learn this language. I want to go to this country. And then, a little bit after that, through my school, I was able to go to Japan for 3 weeks and do like a little homestay. And then just had the best time of my life. And ever since then, never looked back, basically.
That was high school?
Yeah.
Where'd you go for your homestay?
So it was 1 week in Kumamoto, 1 week in Niigata, and then 1 week in Tokyo.
That's like very spread out. How did your high school manage to organize
I don't know. Like, it was like connected to some larger organizations. So all the kids that were like going on the trip with us, there were like some people from my high school and then all these Australian kids. So, you know, I think a part of the reason why it was fun is just because like when you're in high school and you're going on a trip with a bunch of people your age, like we probably could have gone anywhere and it would have been really fun. And at the time I didn't know very much about Japan. So I didn't really realize like, I'm in southern Japan now, I'm in northern Japan now. Like it was just Japan, you know, like, everything looks like anime, you know.
Was this your first impression when you got off the plane? It's like, this looks like anime.
Pretty much. I think so. I mean, of course, now it's been so long, it's hard for me to remember like exactly what I thought. But I mean, everything just looks so different. And very clean, very crisp. Like, I mean, remember just even going to the grocery stores or going to like the department stores and just feeling like everything is amazing, you know?
At the time, you have your first trip, you have your first impressions, but you haven't really started learning the language.
I had like a little bit, but it was very preliminary.
Was there anything that made you click and like, okay, no, I need to learn this and I need to get...
Well, I mean, I already knew I wanted to learn Japanese, and I was kind of like taking classes at high school, actually. Like when I first decided I wanted to learn Japanese, it was like the middle of the first semester of high school. So I was taking Spanish just because you have to take some foreign language, and that was the easiest one. But I had zero interest in it. And so when I got into Japanese and I decided I wanted to learn it, I went to the teacher and I like convinced him to let me transfer in halfway through, even though normally they don't let people do that. And then I think over summer break, I even took like the next year of Japanese at my community college. So I was already like pretty into it. And I found this blog online called All Japanese All the Time, which had a huge influence on me. It's basically the story of this guy named Katsumoto. It's not his real name. He's like a guy from Kenya who grew up in the UK, I guess. But he had this story about how starting his freshman year of high school, he started learning Japanese inside. He was actually then going to college in the US. So he was in Utah and he started immersing himself using, the internet mostly to just listen to Japanese close to 24 hours a day. And then also, read books in Japanese, make flashcards. He had a whole method, but he said doing this really hardcore method, he was able to teach himself Japanese from 0 to fluency in 18 months and then go to a job interview with Sony, and he got hired to be a software engineer in Sony, like right out of college. And then he made this blog about how he did it. So I read this blog as a freshman in high school, and I was like, this makes sense, and it's really cool. And I was like, I tried to start doing the method, but it takes a lot of commitment, and so I kind of start and stop. I wasn't that like really serious about it. And then when I was in Japan for that 3-week trip, there's this one video of the guy that made the blog online speaking Japanese. And I showed it to my host mom at the time. And I'm like, what do you think of this guy? Is he good at Japanese? And she was like, if I wasn't looking, I would have thought it was a Japanese person speaking, even though he's like black. So he's clearly doesn't look Japanese. So as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, this guy's legit. Like, I guess part of me wasn't totally convinced because it sounded too good to be true. So then I decided, okay, the second I get back from this trip, I'm going to start following this guy's method, like to the T, and go full out. So, and that's what I did. Yeah.
Is this blog still active? Is it still?
No, actually, like the guy who made the blog disappeared from the internet a couple years ago. And for a while, the blog was still being hosted. But even now, I guess he didn't update the hosting. And when you go to the original URL, it's gone. But people have made archives. So if you Google like All Japanese All the Time, you can find like archives of it and stuff. Or you can go to the Wayback Machine too and read it.
So you go back from that trip and you're like, oh, there's this method that works. I need to learn this language because I want to go back to Japan. Can you describe this method if you had to summarize it?
His method was, so this is now different than, to kind of like fast forward. There are some things in this method worked really well. Other things had big limitations that I then later went to try to improve on myself. But his method was kind of interesting. He started off learning kanji first, or that's what he recommended. So before you even learn hiragana, he thought you should learn kanji like first thing, like memorize 2,000, maybe even 3,000 kanji using Remembering the Kanji by James Heisig, which is a pretty famous book. And then after that, like a lot of his method wasn't very concrete. It kind of just had these overall principles, like listen to Japanese as much as you can, like cut out as much English from your life as possible. Try to like as close as possible from the moment you wake up. Well, he even did it in his sleep, like literally try to keep Japanese entering your ears 24 hours a day. And just whatever you would do normally, just do it in Japanese. If you're going to watch a movie, watch a Japanese movie. If you're going to learn about a topic, learn about it in Japanese and just replace everything in your life with Japanese. And then also, make flashcards in using Anki or a similar program to, learn all the vocab that comes up. And then focus on input and building up your understanding, and then output and being able to speak and write will kind of come naturally as you learn to just imitate everything that you're coming. So it had a big emphasis on input rather than output.
That's an interesting methodology because I've had a conversation about this also with my wife who's Japanese. But if you watch a movie in Japanese and you don't understand some of the words, if you don't make an effort to translate them, how do you kind of pick it up? Because a movie you see it once and you move on. It's not like something you kind of watch on repeat and the second time or third time you kind of get it. So to what extent does this input actually help, and where's the limitation to like, okay, do you actually need to make an effort now to?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of those things, those kind of blanks, the original guy didn't fill in. So I was kind of, taking those principles and then filling in all the blanks myself. But what I did at the beginning was, at the very beginning, I would watch with Japanese subtitles a lot. And then that way you can look up the words pretty easily, right? Because they're right there in the subtitle. Mm-hmm. So I'd look up the words that I didn't know, and then I'd make flashcards in Anki to memorize those words. And then after I would watch it actively once, kind of looking things up, I'd take the audio and then put it on my iPod, because it was before I had a smartphone back in the day. And I'd just listen to it all the time. Like I used to do this thing where I'd have this iPod just for Japanese audio. And I would have like wired headphones. This was before wireless headphones. So I just have these earbuds.
I still have
and I mean, now they're in Japan, they're like coming back into fashion now. It's like a retro fashion trend. But yeah, I'd like, string them through my shirt and had them hanging out of the top of my shirt like this. And I wouldn't even pause it, because iPods had like crazy battery back then, right? So I would just keep it playing 24 hours a day pretty much. And whenever I had even like 10 seconds, I would put one of the headphones in and like listen to Japanese. But because what I was listening to was mostly things that I'd already watched one time, I could tell like, oh yeah, I remember roughly what's happening here. This is that scene where the girl was yelling at the guy, or where the guy was doing this thing. So that kind of, it wasn't just like random noise, right? I still had some idea what they were saying, and I could try to pick out the words that I knew. But at the beginning, I was probably understanding like 5%. And basically, I just went from 5% to 6% to 7% and just slowly built up. And a lot of what got me through it was just the belief I had in this method, because I just remembered like, well, hey, this is apparently what that guy did, and he got really, really good really quickly. So
he got that good, according to him, in like 18 months.
Yeah.
You go back there. How long do you think it took you to kind of get to?
Yeah, so I think in hindsight, he was probably kind of exaggerating his story. I think the core structure of his story is roughly what happened, but I think he kind of left out some of the details. Like I think he didn't just know exactly what to do from the beginning. He kind of had a period where he was figuring out. And so it was probably closer to like 2.5 years. I think he probably also exaggerated the level he had reached at that time. But in a way, in hindsight, it was probably good that I kind of believed his exaggerations, because it gave me so much motivation to like go through with it. For me, so I spent 6 months doing this all Japanese all the time. And then I went back to Japan for a study abroad. Because I was watching anime, and most anime, or at least a lot of anime, take place in high school. And through watching this anime, I got this idea in my head, which has a lot of truth to it, that the high school experience is a really core component of a Japanese person's life. It's like very formative, and it's something they all share with each other, and it's super fun. You have bukatsu and the cultural festival and all these things. So I was like, man, I'm only a high schooler once. I'm only going to be a high schooler for a couple more years. This is my one chance to get this experience that all Japanese people have of going to Japanese high school and having my amazing, anime experience. So I went and found a study abroad program, and then went and studied abroad in Gunma. So when I arrived in Gunma, I was still a high schooler, probably I think 17 at the time. I'd had a couple years of just lazy, not very focused Japanese study, and then 6 months of this hardcore, all Japanese all the time study. But I still mostly didn't know Japanese. Like I couldn't really understand. I could understand people when they would speak to me like very kind of slowly and really work with me to, help me understand what they're saying. But if two natives were just having a conversation, I was pretty much totally lost. And so, yeah, I spent 6 months in Japan. Actually, I had a really bad time for a lot of reasons, because I didn't speak Japanese. I kind of got unlucky with my host family. I was at a high school that was very focused on helping kids get into a good college. So all the students were very serious, very focused on their studies. And I was just thrown into like physics and math and chemistry.
And not enough socializing, perhaps, then.
Yeah.
If they're all focused on the exams to get to university.
Yeah, totally. Like they were friendly, but they didn't like really go out of the way to reach out. And I also was, introverted and didn't have the best social skills. So, I'm sure a more extroverted person could have made a lot better with the situation. In hindsight, like it's mostly my fault. But at the time, I didn't really, know how to, turn it into something where I'd actually have friends and stuff. So I ended up kind of mostly spending a lot of time at the library, just like reading Japanese, trying to read Japanese books and looking up tons of words and making flashcards, and almost doing the same thing that I probably would have been doing at home. But I did have the advantage of the fact that if I was at home, I would have had to be going to American school and doing English class. But because I didn't have that, I literally could just spend all day working on Japanese. I remember I would purposely try to have days where I didn't hear or speak a single word of English, and I'd like keep track of that. So like when the English teacher, like sometimes I'd have English class at Japanese high school and he would make me speak English, I'd be like, oh, I ruined my streak for today. Almost got through the whole
kind
day.
of like the gamification of the language apps nowadays.
Yeah. And it was a fun like game. So, I mean, yeah, I enjoyed the learning Japanese aspect and I made a lot of progress, but then I had a terrible time. And actually it was supposed to be a 10-month experience. And after 6 months, I was so kind of like isolated and depressed, I decided to leave and come home early.
Especially when you're a high schooler, 10 months feels like a long time. It's the entire
Yeah.
year, right?
Yeah.
Now
I felt like I'd been there forever, basically.
Yeah. Now, as an adult, 10 months out, it's okay. It's going to go by very fast.
Yeah.
But as a high schooler, 1 year, one school
Yeah,
is
like
long.
the crazy thing too is like I only spent those 6 months in Japan, but for like years, for the first 3-4 years after that, those 6 months worth of memories felt like 5 years worth of memories, right? Just because also when you have very different experiences, right? They are a lot like, you know, they leave a bigger impression in your memory, like they're more dense. And so after that, I'm just in America living doing pretty much the same thing every day that I've always done. So like multiple years just kind of feel like one blurry memory. Whereas those 6 months in Japan were so
intense.
Yeah. And so, yeah, when I came back, now I had 1 year of intense Japanese under my belt, and I was starting to kind of felt like I was really starting to get somewhere with it. Like I could kind of read books now. I could understand a lot of anime with no subtitles and like follow the plot. Like I could speak a little bit, but mostly it wasn't there yet. But I had this sense that like, okay, I've made a lot of progress. And so I kind of had this, you know, had to look inside and be like, okay, Japan wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to have this like amazing anime-like experience, and it kind of sucked. But I still felt some connection to Japan, and like there was something there that I wasn't ready to throw out. And I felt like I wanted to finish what I had started with Japanese. So ultimately, I decided to just keep doing this method and keep working like really hard.
Continued with this immersion methodology.
Yeah, in America too.
In America, which is then another big challenge because you're immersing yourself, but not immersed at all, right? You're surrounded by English everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, there's different challenges. Like one interesting thing that I found was like when you immerse yourself, you can only interact with the aspects of the culture that you like. You know, like I'm only watching shows and listening to content that I really like. So it's easy to stay motivated in a sense. Whereas when I was in Japan and I had to, you know, talk to my host mom that would sometimes be really mean to me, or like go to school and feel really isolated and just feel like everyone was like not really accommodating me that much, it would start to, have a little bit of resentment that would build up towards Japan. And then that would, you know, mess with my motivation. So in a way, on a motivational level, it was almost easier when I could just curate my entire experience of Japan. I don't know, if your goal is to like get an authentic Japanese experience, that's obviously not what's happening, but it was good for just language study. And at the time, I mean, I was just so dedicated to this. I pretty much had almost no social life. I would just, study Japanese all day and only interact with my family I had a couple friends, but I was just kind of like very single-mindedly focused on this thing.
And eventually you decide, okay, time to move back to Japan.
But actually there was a 10-year period from when I got back from Japan from that high school study abroad until I finally came here again and moved here.
10 years.
Yeah. So like my story after that is
this is like a time lapse in an anime movie.
Basically, yeah. So like a lot of people I think never even realize this. They just assume that I've been in Japan the whole time. But basically, I came back from Japan. I basically still couldn't speak Japanese. I was like, you know, starting to be able to understand a little bit, but I still had very overall low level of Japanese. And I got fluent in Japanese in America. And then I started this whole YouTube channel about how to learn Japanese. And I kind of gained this reputation as one of the best foreigner Japanese speaking like Westerners, even though I basically had learned Japanese in America. And it wasn't pretty much all my YouTube content that people know me for is I made that in America, basically having never lived in Japan after I became fluent in Japanese.
Wow. So still the dedication to learn the language, even though you're not living there. And I'm sure during 10 years, you were doing something else. You were having a job at some point.
Not really in a sense. So like basically what happened was, so when I came back from the study abroad, instead of going back to normal, it's because I didn't get any actual school credit when I was in Japan. If I would have gone back to my normal high school, I would have been like held back a year. Mm-hmm. So instead of doing that, I went to the local community college to get like high school equivalency. And because that it was more like a college, so it's kind of more lenient. You can like choose your schedule, and you know, it's you go to your class, and when you don't have class, you can do whatever you want. There's not like teachers kind of controlling the environment. And so I still had classes, but it was easy. Overall, it was easy to stay very focused on Japanese. And because it was a community college, the high school credits also counted as college credits for a lot of them. So after a couple years of doing that, I think maybe when I was around 3 years of Japanese hardcore immersion. So, you know, 1 year, like came back from Japan, I was at 1 year, then 2 more years doing this in America while going to community college. Then I transferred to a normal like 4-year university. And at that university, there was Japanese exchange students. And anyone who's, you know, had knows how Japanese people tend to act. They form this very
group,
tight-knit community where they pretty much just hang out with other Japanese exchange students and don't really interact with the locals very much. And so I was like pretty much the one white guy at my college that went and hung out with the Japanese people. And they were really nice and really cool because all of them kind of like, yeah, we're in America. We should make American friends. We should interact with the culture more.
And they make the one American friend that speaks Japanese.
Yeah. So of course, there was actually a few like really intense exchange students that were like, I'm not going to talk to you because I came here to learn English. And you're not going to speak. You're too good at Japanese. So sorry, like you seem cool, but I can't talk to you. And most of them would speak Japanese to me, and so that was the first time I started like speaking Japanese regularly. Because up until that point, I was pretty much just doing input only for 2 years. Like when I came back to Japan until that point, I would listen to Japanese like 24 hours a day, virtually never speak it. And so that was when I started speaking regularly, and of course that grew my Japanese a lot. And then I ended up being a Japanese major, even though I didn't learn very much because I was pretty much already fluent at Japanese at that point. But it still allowed me to pretty much just focus on Japanese all day pretty much for most of the time. And then I started my YouTube channel where I started talking about learning Japanese and made a Patreon. And that started actually bringing in some real money. So I took a break from college to basically run my Patreon full time. And then it ended up just becoming my job and I never went back to college.
Interesting. So we're going to dive more now into your methodology, which you've then developed over time and kind of that you're sharing on Patreon and on your YouTube. But before we dive into this, I want to kind of clarify a few words that I'm sure we're going to use regularly, such as language fluency. And what's your take on this? And how do you define fluency? Or rather, if you use the word fluency in our conversation, what do you mean by that? I think a lot of people will understand. Some people, it's like native level. Some people will understand it like, well, you can work in the language without any issues.
Yeah.
So how would you define fluency?
Yeah, like for me, this is like one of those topics that in the language learning world never goes away and is always being continually debated because everyone has a different understanding of it. I'm not actually that interested in the debate itself because ultimately it's just a word that everyone has a different interpretation of, but it's also something you can't get around because it ends up getting used in conversation. Even I end up using it myself a lot. So, I mean, there's the European scale. So I think like probably B1 or B2 on the European scale.
Oh, yeah, roughly that scale. I remember that when I was growing up. I don't remember what they refer to, but...
Yeah, I mean, so for me, when I look back on the thresholds of like my own Japanese learning journey, so after I came back from Japan, I had this period where I, only was getting input pretty much 24 hours a day, just watching anime and reading Japanese novels and then listening all day. And then I had this opportunity to kind of be a tour guide for Japanese college students that were visiting my city just for 3 weeks. And that was the first time I got to speak Japanese in a year since I got back from Japan. And I found that actually I could speak it decently well. Like it kind of I had heard all these patterns so many times that when I went to try to say something, it would kind of pop into my head. Like I could, imagine all the different scenes I'd seen of Japanese people saying a similar thing. And I could kind of piece it together. It wasn't perfect. And I was still saying a lot of things that were unnatural. Sometimes I would have to kind of compromise on what I really wanted to say something that was kind of similar and stuff like that. But overall, I could understand almost everything that they'd say to me. And I could express most of the things I wanted to talk about when we were just having daily conversations. Like I probably couldn't have talked about philosophy or like, politics or something, but it felt like I could express myself relatively freely. And that was the first time I was like, oh, if someone asked me if I was fluent in Japanese, I think I could say yes. And
so you can kind of go with the flow of the conversation back and forth on most general topics.
Yeah. And like, of course, I wasn't satisfied with my level at all. I still wanted to have like a lot more control and more precision and more accuracy. But overall, it kind of felt like, there were many moments I'd forget I was speaking Japanese because we could just have a conversation, When the natives would speak to each other, sometimes I still couldn't fully follow along because they start going really fast and, you miss one thing and then you're gone. But when they would be speaking to me, then I could understand most things. I wouldn't have to dumb it down very much. And yeah, it felt like, okay, I have like a base level of fluency now. And then but after that kind of 3-week experience, I went back to like not speaking Japanese regularly. And then I just kind of went back into full input mode. Then another year after that, that's when I went to the college and I felt a big improvement from that, 2 years of immersion versus 3 years of immersion. And at that point, I felt a lot more, free that like I could kind of start to play with the language a little more, like I could use some fancy expressions or, and most of the things that I would say would probably be like, if you wrote them, my pronunciation wasn't perfect, but if you wrote them down, they'd be something that didn't have any grammar mistakes, or maybe a native would say. And when I did make a mistake, I could tell when I was making a mistake a lot of the time. So I had a lot like, more control.
Control and precision.
Yeah. Now I was kind of like, okay, now there's no doubt I'm definitely fluent in Japanese. Kind of like I went from like weak fluency to like strong fluency, maybe like B1 to B2, like that. And then after that, I had 2 more years at university doing that. And by the time I was at 5-year mark, that was when I was kind of like, okay, I'm really good at this now. Like, it's very rare when a foreigner can speak Japanese as well as me. And probably at the time I was overestimating my ability too, because there's all the Dunning-Kruger curves that you go through. So at the time I was kind of like, okay, I'm pretty much mastered this. I'm like, I still have room for improvement, but I'm pretty much like the king of this now. Like, I figured this thing out. And that was when I started making my YouTube channel more and being like, hey guys, I figured this out, so you should listen to me type of deal. I was kind of, yeah.
And then you continued this and you realized, oh wait, there's still many more things I can kind of learn and dive into pitch accent and all of these things.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because I was kind of around the same time I started getting into pitch accent. It was right when I was kind of like, okay, well, I've pretty much figured this out. What am I missing now? And then I asked my Japanese friends for like what sounded off about my Japanese. And that was when they told me that, my what they call intonation was off. Like, I would go up and down in the wrong places. And at first I didn't know what that meant or what to make of that. And then when I did more research, I discovered that it was pitch accent. And basically my pitch accent was completely off. But almost every foreigner's pitch accent is completely off. So in a sense, to this day, it's kind of a funny thing where Japanese people are just, it's like such a given that foreigners are going to mess up pitch accent that they almost never point it out or say anything.
Most foreigners probably don't even know about it. I remember in my Japanese learning journey, I had never really heard about pitch accent until I watched some videos from Dogen, who was talking about this. And I, what's this? Oh, it looks like before studying Japanese many years ago, I studied Chinese. So they have more like an intonation on the words. And it looks like the Chinese intonations a little bit of where you put the emphasis.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when you learn Chinese, they tell you about the tones on day one, and they emphasize a lot. They always tell you about how important it is. And in Japanese, the pitch accent in a lot of ways is very similar to the Chinese tones and how they work and the role they play in the language. But then it's like almost never talked about. I mean, to be fair, when it comes to intelligibility, messing up tones in Chinese hurts your intelligibility a lot more than pitch accent does. So that's probably why. I mean, Japanese is so hard and most people study so inefficiently, in my opinion, that they never really get to a high level of fluency. So I can kind of see why the textbooks and the teachers are like, let's just try to get them to like survival level. Let's give them the bare minimum because they can't handle any more than that.
Well, get them to N2, right? That is always the mark that they're using, especially at Japanese language schools here in Japan, to get students to qualify for the JLPT N2 level, and then be admissible to universities or Senmon Gakko or other
JLPT
institutions.
Doesn't even test anything about your speaking ability, right?
No, just your
listening ability,
right?
Your comprehension.
So you are very confident in your Japanese ability. You're back in university, you start your channel and you want to teach. You said earlier that you were learning from that immersion approach from the blogger,
all Japanese
but
all the
you
time.
Felt that there were gaps.
Yeah.
So when you decide to start teaching and share your knowledge and insight, what was your approach? How did you frame this is how I think is the best way to learn Japanese?
Well, so at the time, like I was so influenced by that blog. Like, I mostly followed the blog's instructions and it mostly worked. It took me longer. So like I would say it probably took me 3 years to reach the point that I thought that the author sounded like it only took him 18 months to reach. But overall, getting that fluent in Japanese in 3 years is still a really impressive feat. It's pretty rare to see. Now it's getting more common because there's more people studying Japanese, and the efficient methods are getting more well known. But back, at the time, it was like pretty rare thing. So I still felt like this blog, gave me so much, right? But the creator of the blog had pretty much disappeared from the internet for many years at that point. And because of that, no one was talking about all Japanese all the time online. It was starting to just get forgotten into the, history of the internet. Whereas for me, and I had one or two other like friends that had also used the website to get fluent in Japanese, we would talk about it. And to us, it was a really meaningful, big part of our lives. But the whole rest of the internet was forgetting about it. So my first videos were more about just telling people about, hey, there's this thing called all Japanese all the time called the AJAT. There's this thing called AJAT. Here's how you do it. it's actually works. It's actually legit. You should definitely do this. It's way more effective than the other methods. So at the beginning, although there already were some things where I was like, you should do it. You should change what the original method was because I found that this tweak makes it better. Overall, I was just presenting it as here's how you do AJAT. And I didn't emphasize my tweaks too much. But over time, as I worked with more students, and I also started, it forced me to think about the whole process a lot more now that I'm teaching it, right? And I'm getting all these questions and I'm getting all these people. Like at the beginning, I was kind of like I started off being a blind follower of this website, almost like it was a religion. And now that I'm a pretty logical person, and I like to really pursue the truth. So once I start making these YouTube videos, people bring up good point. They make arguments in the comments, and I'm having to debate these things. And I realize, there's some people are making a good point. There's some aspects of the original method I can't really defend. And I had my own experiences, so I started tweaking and adding more and more. And other people just have new ideas. We had people make new software that unlock new possibilities. So it kind of just transformed over time. And at a certain point, I'm like, I think we need a new name because, there's two aspects of it. One is that now the method has evolved quite a bit from the original method. And there's also the fact that the original method was this guy's thing. It's not my thing. So, I don't even know if he wants me using his brand name. Plus, I kind of, now that I'm adding so much to it, I want to be able to take credit for what I'm adding, right? So I wanted my own brand. So that was when I started kind of rebranding it as my own thing. And yeah, my YouTube channel's name has always been Matt vs. Japan. But I have different names of my methods throughout the years. Like at first, I was partnered up with my friend Lucas, and we called it Mass Immersion Approach. That was MIA was our version of how to do this style of learning.
Okay.
And then we kind of split up, and then I made Refold, which is like a new version of it. And now recently, I call my particular curriculum of how to do this style of learning the MVJ method, just because I'm like, I'm tired of making up these names.
Yeah, so it's just your method that you kind of have developed over time with based from this AJAT and from all the input, the questions, and kind of the refinement over the years.
There's still a lot of the original method you can see in mine.
So the approach that you're now sharing is still based on this immersion, based on like having a lot of input 24/7.
Like I think, and now that it started to grow, like I don't want to take too much credit for it, but when I started talking about this, it was pretty much no one was talking about it online. And then people started watching my videos and talking about it more and more. And these ideas of comprehensible input and Stephen Krashen's work started to become more well-known online. And then some people that used my content to learn Japanese themselves started making their own content. So now it's pretty well-known, and it's kind of called just immersion learning. It's kind of like the umbrella term for all these things, because there's all these little specific versions of it. But there's this umbrella of immersion learning that all has these principles of mostly focusing on input, getting lots of exposure to native content from the beginning, and kind of trying to pick up the language in a lot of ways in a similar way that we picked up our native language, but doing it in an intentional way and in a self-directed way as well.
So let's dive a little bit into that methodology.
Yeah.
Immersion. You talked about like having a lot of input on many levels, and we briefly talked about, okay, you watch a movie and you listen to it, and maybe you look up some of the words. Generally speaking, what do people get wrong about this? I feel like it's very easy to fall into the category perhaps of it's immersion, it's input, so you are passive. And you just put on the earphones like you were having 12 hours a day around your neck and just listen, and it's just gonna come magically on its own. Yeah,
so that's like a big one. I think that was probably what I would have said is the biggest misconception, is that it's just exposure, and you just listening to incomprehensible input and doing nothing, and then think that you're gonna automatically get better. And so in reality, the way that I did it and the way that most people do it is there's an active study component of it as well. And so it's more kind of like a hybrid approach of you're doing, like what most people do is something similar to what everyone thinks of when they think of learning language, right? Like you're still learning grammar and you're memorizing vocabulary, but you consider that to be like, 20, 30% of the overall process. And the other 70% is getting exposure and learning to actually pick out the things that you learned from native content. Because people who are really new to language learning and haven't really tried it, I think they have this idea that language learning is a lot like math almost. Like you just memorize the words, you memorize the grammar formulas, and then you'll just understand and you'll be able to think, use it yourself. But in reality, you need to build up so much infrastructure in your brain to be able to, like, grammar is so complicated and there's so many small nuances, and words too are, most words in Japanese, there's not a direct one-to-one equivalent in English. So you have to grasp the nuance of them. And if you want to be speaking fluently, you can't be translating in your head, or there's not enough time. So if you just study, no matter how much you do that study, even if you get to the point where you can pass tests with perfect scores, when you actually just hear a Japanese person speak, you won't understand what they're saying. And the only way you'll be able to speak is if you have taken English thought, use these grammar principles to translate it, and then say whatever you came up with. But you're going to end up, first of all, it's going to be very slow. And what you're going to say is going to not sound natural at all, because Japanese people don't speak in English with the words replaced into Japanese words, right?
They don't. So the starting point is listening, active listening, not just passive. How do you listen? How do you make the best of, let's say you have 1 hour and you put the earphones in? An example would be that something that I struggle with sometimes. Let's say on the way back from work, I put the earphones in and I will listen to a Japanese podcast for 30 minutes while I'm on the train. But I will maybe zone out. If I don't kind of get into the conversation, I will just hear the Japanese in the background, but my mind will be elsewhere. And then I get off the train, I'm like, oh, what did I just listen to? And it's kind of all gone.
Yeah, well, I think to kind of take a step back and talk about the theory behind these ideas. So, yeah, a lot of these ideas originally come from this linguist named Krashen. And it's kind of interesting because, like, when you actually search videos about immersion learning, people talk about Krashen like his ideas are the end-all be-all. And then when you actually look in linguistics and like second research on second language acquisition and stuff like that, you find that, like, he had some core insights that were really true. But there were also some limitations to his insights, and they've kind of built on top of them and gone forward. But a lot of those nuances haven't got, funneled back into, like, I don't know, YouTube and like kind of language learning community conversation. But what ends up happening is people either like go too much on Krashen, like 100%, or they end up like throwing out the baby with the bathwater, I think, because then they hear like, oh, linguistics doesn't talk about Krashen anymore. I guess it's like all bullshit. When in reality, what linguists don't, like in the field of linguistics, they're not really talking about Krashen, but his ideas have already been integrated into, the frameworks that they're still using now. So there's still like the ideas can still be found there. But the basic idea that he has that is still kind of a good starting point is that he makes a distinction between what he called language learning and language acquisition. And these probably weren't the best terms because we tend to use them both in many different ways. But his definition of the words was learning is what you do in school. When you consciously memorize what words mean, you consciously memorize grammar formulas. And yeah, that type of deliberate, conscious learning is what he called language learning.
Okay.
And then there's this other completely different process called language acquisition, where this is how we learned our first language. So it's actually an unconscious process where we get input in the language, and even though we're not consciously necessarily paying attention to the grammar or the vocab, we might just be focused on the meaning and kind of almost ignoring the specifics of the grammar and the vocab and what tenses there are or whether there's particles, whatever. But our unconscious mind is noticing all those things and analyzing those things and breaking those things down and building a kind of unconscious model of how the language works. Kind of like actually in a really similar way to how like large language models are trained with input, right? And so, consciously, you might just be watching a show, whereas unconsciously your mind's doing all these complicated things. And the result is that you end up with an intuition for language that you might not be able to explain. So, we've all probably experienced in our native language, well, actually, maybe not everybody if you haven't dealt with language learning a lot, but, when you're speaking your native language, if someone makes a grammar mistake, you can immediately notice that they made a mistake. You can immediately correct it and tell them what the right thing would be. But if someone asked you, why is it that way? Or what is the specific rule that governs this? Unless you've specifically studied grammar, which most people haven't, you don't know.
You notice this a lot if you go abroad and you actually find a job teaching your home language and you never thought about the processes behind how the sentences are structured. And
exactly. Like actually, it now, if you buy like a grammar textbook on like English grammar, for example, there's very thorough descriptions of exactly how English grammar works. But it took like decades of work by linguists analyzing English and working really hard to figure out what's actually happening, right? So even like 100 years ago, we didn't have an accurate description of how English grammar works. It was nearly as accurate as what we have today. Yet everyone was still speaking English, right? And the grammar fundamentally was the same. So that type of conscious knowledge about grammar is totally different than the intuition for grammar that we have. So basically what Stephen Krashen said is learning and acquisition are totally separate in the sense that learning never leads to acquisition. Like I think a lot of people have an assumption that if they learn something consciously, like a grammar rule, and then they just apply it over and over and over, like through practice, they'll end up being in the same state as like a native speaker where it just happens naturally and they have an intuitive understanding of it. But what he said is that that's not how it works. Conscious knowledge is always conscious knowledge, and that unconscious intuition, that native-like ability to just know what's right and have it just come out right the first time, like, is only cultivated through getting comprehensible input. So his kind of philosophy, or I guess the kind of conclusion of everything he talked about, was basically throw learning out the window because it doesn't do anything, and then focus on getting comprehensible input. So for him, the comprehensible portion was really important. That basically when you hear something spoken in the language and you can understand what it means. So at the very beginning, you're starting from scratch. So the understanding comes entirely from information that's basically nonverbal data, right? Like if I hold this up and I was like, this is a cup, you can probably maybe draw the connection that cup means this thing or mug or whatever. But even if you didn't speak any English, right? So at the beginning, you need to have kind of input that's kind of been designed to be specifically comprehensible.
So multisensory.
Yeah, and generally visual is the biggest,
So if you're just listening to a podcast without actually seeing anything, this is where you kind of lose a little bit of that.
So I think, if you have only incomprehensible input, then there's still some things that you can pick up because part of, there's a lot of research on what's called statistical learning. So part of the way that your brain acquires language is when you hear language, there's unconscious parts of your brain that purely look for statistical patterns in the input that you're hearing. And you can learn some things about how the sound system works, right? Like how syllables are structured and what consonants and vowels exist in the language, even if you don't have no idea what's being understood, because your brain is just taking basically tallies on what sounds it's hearing. But you can't take that very far if it's incomprehensible. So in order to start learning what words mean and how grammar works, and even to build a more fleshed out understanding of the sound system, you need comprehensible input. So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make, or when they try to apply this immersion learning, is that they forget the comprehensible aspect to it, and they just start watching incomprehensible or getting incomprehensible input. Now there is a lot of nuance here, because even if you just started watching an anime, for example, with no subtitles, you didn't do anything, you just started watching anime, there would be bits and pieces that are a little bit comprehensible to you. Because there's times where someone just yells something, or they have a very 1 or 2 word sentence. And, your brain's going to start picking things out like des and little things just through repetition, and then you can kind of eventually infer what they mean. So I think hypothetically, it would be possible if you were just going to sit and do nothing but watch anime for like a couple tens of thousands of hours.
Couple of tens of thousands.
Yeah, you would probably get fluent in Japanese, even if that's all you did. But it's going to be very inefficient because most of it's going to be incomprehensible.
So what, if you categorize content, what will be like, let's say, 3 comprehensible input sources?
Yeah. Well, so basically, this is the problem that we're faced with as a learner, right? Is we need comprehensible input. Where are we going to get it? So there's fundamentally 2 different strategies to approaching this problem. One, which is the more obvious one, is get input that's inherently comprehensible. The other one is use learning as a tool to make input comprehensible. So this is beyond what Stephen Krashen originally put forward. But basically, fundamentally, I think what he said is true in that learning itself, like when you memorize a grammar rule, no matter how many times you practice applying that grammar rule, it's never going to result in the same native-like type of intuition, because it's fundamentally formed completely differently. Like when you learn a grammar rule, it's a top-down, it's just given to you in its final state, right? Like here, this is how it works, period. Whereas the way that we acquire grammar is we just get lots of comprehensible input. Our brain notices the patterns across the input, and it slowly kind of abstracts out and deduces how things are working by the commonalities across many examples, right? It's actually very similar to how large language models are trained. And so the way the knowledge is formed through that bottom-up organic extraction process, in a way, it's always in flux, right? It's always the total culmination of all the input that you've gotten. And that's why sometimes things can drift in certain ways over time like that. Whereas if someone just tells you the grammar rule works like this, it's like a limited fixed thing that's not organic.
And that doesn't apply to French because French has exceptions to every rule. So,
I haven't studied French, luckily, but
lucky for you.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's why a lot of the things that are like considered hard are only hard if you take that approach of like learning, trying to consciously learn the rules, because then you have to learn the exceptions and the exceptions to the exceptions. Whereas if you let your brain just pick it up, it's actually very good at handling exceptions.
Interesting.
Like kind of organically. That's just kind of how it does things on its own. But yeah, so basically, fundamentally, it's important to understand, I think, that learning itself is not going to get you to fluency. It's not even going to get you to the point where you can understand what people are saying. But learning can function as a tool that makes things comprehensible. So if someone, like, let's say that, so when you're using this distinction, right? There's a distinction between learning and acquisition, right? So what it feels like to have learned something is like, let's say if I make up a fake word, like, this is always the hardest thing to do.
It is,
like,
yeah.
Well, let's just say that you're learning Japanese, and I'll use the Japanese word of, this is bad because then it's just English if I say it in Japanese. But
denki.
Like denki.
Denki.
Okay, yeah. So you have like denki, right? So if you have acquired the word denki, then the second that you hear it, you already understood it. There's zero time lag. It was automatic. In fact, you could like try to not understand it, and you still would understand it. Right? Even if you're really tired or really drunk or you don't know what's going on, you still, when you hear it, it's just the meaning and the sounds almost, you experience them simultaneously. That's what, there's no effort whatsoever involved. That's what it feels like when you've acquired it. When you've only learned it, you'll hear it, that will trigger a memory, and then after that, you'll recall the meaning, right? So it feels subjectively very different to be like, denki, oh, I know that word, that's electricity, right? Okay. It's like one step leads to the next. But if the way we acquire is through getting comprehensible input. So if there's many situations where, someone, you're understanding mostly what's going on, and someone says like, oh yeah, can you turn on the denki, like denki tsuketekuru, and then you can tell from what they're pointing to that they meant the lights, then the unconscious part of your brain will start to like put it in place what it means. That's how you start to build that natural intuition of what it means. And so what can happen if you can use learning as a tool to make things comprehensible so that you acquire. So if someone says like, with no context, just like denki tsuketekuru, then if you hadn't learned anything, that might, unless they pointed or something, then it probably would just be incomprehensible.
Yeah, you will lose track of what they're saying.
Yeah. But if you've memorized it, so then you can recall it, and then you can be like, oh, that means light. And then you can put together, oh, what he just told me was to turn on the light. Then now you've fed your unconscious mind what it needs, which is a pair of meaning and understanding. And that can lead to acquisition. So it's like a subtle nuance, but it's really important that in this way, the learning itself didn't like lead to acquisition. It indirectly like helped acquisition happen by allowing you to make input comprehensible. Ultimately, your unconscious mind is still coming to its own kind of conclusion on what it, what the word really means and things like that. And so kind of going back to what I was talking about a second ago, that was kind of like a long tangent, but basically you can try to consume content or find content that's inherently comprehensible because it's simplified, or you can basically just do learning and watching kind of incomprehensible content. You can combine them together and make it comprehensible. So fundamentally, that's what I did when I learned Japanese. Is I had flashcards and Anki. I'd memorized like 10 new words every day, and I had like knowledge of how the grammar worked roughly. So then I could just go watch anime and I could pick out all the things that I'd learned, and that would kind of make it more comprehensible. And I kind of learned it that way. You're still gonna have like kind of the stomach for it, because ultimately you're still starting off with very little comprehension.
But you've got 10 new words, and then you've got a whole episode of an anime that is probably going to use a couple of sounds that you also not
exactly. So that's why I said like I started off at like 5%. I went to 6%, 7%. Like a lot of people, they go into this being like, I want to understand everything, and they pause and they like are trying to go sentence by sentence. They're not going to move on until they perfectly understand the sentence. Whereas that's like not going to get you there.
So this is an interesting point. I had that conversation with my wife also when, let's take another example, reading. If I take now a magazine in Japanese or a novel in Japanese, I can read through it, but like there will be every so often kanji that I can't read. And it's just going to be blank in my mind, because if there's no furigana to at least indicate the pronunciation, I just don't know. I either look it up or it's a blank word in the middle of a sentence. Do you stop and translate that, or do you kind of skip and you're like, okay, I still understand the general meaning of the paragraph, that's enough, I continue and continue the reading process? Or do you stop and look up the word, note it, study it, and know it for next time? Like, what is
it? So I think reading and listening are a little different. So in the case of listening, you can pick things up without ever looking anything up, right? Because I mean, that's how we learned our native language, right? Your brain can hear the sound. Maybe you didn't get it the first time, but the first time you hear it, maybe part of your brain goes like, okay, so at least that's a word now. Like before you didn't know that denki was a word. Now you know that denki is a word. You don't know what it is yet, but you know it's a word. And then maybe you come across you come across it in another context and your brain's, oh, that was that word that I heard a second ago, denki. What does it mean? Well, maybe it means light, but maybe it means plant, and maybe it means table, because there's a lot of things. But it got narrowed down a little bit. You're like, okay, I think it's an object though. It kind of feels like based on the context of an object. And then the next time you hear it, it narrows down a little more and a little more. And then like basically now that your brain knows it's a word, every time you come across it, your brain's saving a little bit more of the context it showed up in until eventually it like hones in on exactly what that nuance is. Like kind of the image I have in my mind is like carving a marble statue. Like you start off with one block of marble, a rectangular block, and every context you come across, you're shaving a little bit off until eventually you're left with like the perfect exact nuance of the word. And so that can happen even if you never look anything up. If you look it up, maybe you can speed up the process because like I said, then you just have an idea of roughly what it means. Although it's important to be aware that any understanding you gain from reading a definition is not going to be the same as perfectly understanding the exact nuance of it. Like in English, like this is true in every language, but we have lots of synonyms, right? So if I could say like punch, smack, like whack, there's like probably a bunch more I could use that basically all mean hit, right? I'm going to hit you. But they're not all synonymous with each other. They're not like, you can't just replace one for another and have it be the same. Each one has a subtly different nuance. If I said like, I'm going to whack you versus like, I'm going to punch you, right?
One difference that comes to mind with Japanese, which also applies to, let's say, other languages that don't use the Latin alphabet, is that if now, let's say I would apply that method to reading a text in Spanish, I can still pronounce maybe poorly the word and have sounds associated with it in my brain. But if I take the Japanese sentence and I stumble upon a kanji that I can't read, if I don't look it up, this is just blank. It's just a combination of strokes that form a character, which maybe I'll be able to recognize visually in another text, but I will never know how to pronounce it if I don't look it up.
So that's why I was saying fundamentally there's a difference between reading and listening. So with listening, like I said, looking it up is kind of optional, you could say. With reading, it's not, because like you said, if you don't look up the kanji, you can't infer the reading from context. The information is just not there at all. And the only way you're going to learn how to read it is if you look it up.
So there is no shortcut. There's no, just keep reading. But
maybe the only shortcut is you can watch with subtitles. If you watch a Japanese TV show with subtitles, then you can pick it up that way, or even read books while listening to the audiobook. But what I did is I just looked them up. And I would make flashcards when it comes to kanji in particular, the most important thing is to not learn individual kanji and always just learn how to read words and almost forget that individual kanji are a thing. And then 99% of the problems associated with learning kanji immediately vanish when you do that. Because every kanji has a billion different meanings and a billion different readings, but each word has essentially, some words have a couple different meanings, but essentially there's one consistent meaning and one reading. And so if you just learn how to read words, you never have to be worrying about which reading is it, which meaning is it. Sometimes words have multiple meanings, so that there's a little more nuance there, but yeah, for the most part. And then for your other question of like, do I look up every single one? Do I skip it? I base that on how many words you don't know. So like, if you're looking up more than one word every minute, then basically now you're doing more looking up than reading.
Yeah.
And it kind of, you get into this mode where you kind of lose the context that you're reading in, and everything you look up immediately kind of like falls out of your brain, and then you retain almost nothing. And so depending on what level you're at, like if you're at a lower level and there's just words you don't know everywhere, I used to have a rule where I'd only look it up if the second time I came across it. And in reality, if I come across a word and I'm like, I feel like I've never seen this before, this looks brand new to me, I wouldn't look it up. If I came across a word and I was like, this looks familiar, I'm pretty sure I've seen this before, then I would look it up. And in reality, to get that feeling of this looks familiar, I probably saw it more than one time before. I probably saw it maybe 10 times before. Because at the very beginning, the language is very slippery and every word kind of feels and sounds the same. And so you have to see something many times before it starts to have like a unique, feeling to you. But the reason that's good is because frequency is very important when you're learning a language. There's this thing called Zipf's law, which basically, essentially what it means is that the most commonly used words are used exponentially more than the least common used words. And because of that, like the most common 1,000 words in the language will let you cover 80% of the words that are used in like daily conversation. And so you have to make sure that you're spending your time learning the common words versus not the infrequently used words at the beginning, because that will like make your learning progress like exponentially more.
So that kind of brings me a little bit to my next question, which is what you read, what you listen, or what you watch really matters. Because if you're, I noticed that when I'm picking up, let's say, a magazine about interiors or whatnot, there's a lot of specialized vocabulary. Plus, the writers are trained writers, staff writers, editors that want to make it sound and look very nice. So it's not at all catered to like a language learner.
Yeah.
And you end up stopping a lot to learn words that you have never seen before, and that are also very rarely used. Same on TV. If you start watching, I don't know, a law drama, you might have a lot of very specialized vocabulary. So do you have specific recommendations for things for people to watch, to listen to read?
Yeah. So now, like when I was learning Japanese, this didn't exist. So my only choice was to basically start with incomprehensible content and make it work. But now there's this whole genre of comprehensible input content that has started to grow more and more. That, you know, now that people kind of learned about Stephen Krashen and these ideas, the kind of obvious idea becomes, oh, well, let's make content that's comprehensible even to a beginner. And then if you do that, hypothetically, you can learn just through input. And in fact, this is like kind of a tangent, but I think it's really important for people to know about, is there was this guy who, like my most recent thinking on language learning has been influenced more by this person than anyone else. There's this linguist named J. Marvin Brown, who he was born in like 1925, I think, and he passed away in like the very early 2000s. But he was extremely inspired by Stephen Krashen's work, and he kind of took Stephen Krashen's work like farther than Stephen Krashen himself took it. He was like more Stephen Krashen than Stephen Krashen. And what he did was he made a school in Thailand to teach the Thai language to foreigners. And the way the school worked is it was taught 100% through comprehensible input. So there'd be a group of you know, American adults, or like for not just Americans, but, you know, people who were not Thai, didn't speak Thai, starting in this classroom. No one knew a single word of Thai. Ideally, you would start knowing literally zero. There'd be 2 native Thai speakers in front of the classroom, and they'd engage with each other just speaking Thai, but they'd use, you know, gestures and props and games and pictures and interactions with each other to make the input comprehensible. And when we say comprehensible here, it doesn't mean that you're understanding every single word, because at the beginning you're understanding nothing, right? But you get the overall gist of what they're saying, right? So if I maybe if you could speak zero Japanese, but I could point to the light, like if a light's off and it's dark and I point to the light and be like, you might know that I'm saying, okay, he wants me to turn the light on, even if you have no idea what the individual words were or like anything that's going on. But that's all that's really required for your unconscious mind to start absorbing the language, because it's going to figure the details out on its own. So it's comprehensible in that sense. People get generally a sense of like, oh, okay, I see this guy. He's really proud of his fancy shoes, and then the other guy stepped on his shoe, and now he's pissed off that he's got his shoe dirty. You know, like that. If you have that level of understanding, that's what you need for your brain to start putting the pieces together. So he made this curriculum that was taught 100% this way, just native speakers speaking. Like they didn't speak any English at all. He actually forbid people to use dictionaries and to look anything up, to ask questions about the language. And he just taught adults the Thai language the same way that infants learn, like all through talking. And at the beginning, he actually had a rule no speaking either. Like if you had to ask a question or speak, you would say it in your native language. Like you'd say it in English, and they'd answer you in Thai.
Interesting.
Because he wanted to get people out of that mindset of trying to, you know, piece together the language consciously like it was math. He wanted people to just absorb it naturally and basically do it all unconsciously the way native speakers do. And it actually worked. Like people within, I think it took about like 2,000 hours of getting comprehensible input in the classroom. Like he'd do it for 5 hours a day. So it was like a full-time commitment. You do this 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. And when people would, after like a year or two, when they'd hit 2,000 hours, then they'd start being able to speak, and pretty quickly they would get to a point where they're really fluent in the language, and they had never consciously done any studying. They just showed up, were entertained by these kind of skits and stuff, and slowly the levels, there was different, you know, you'd move up the levels as you racked up more hours, and the content would get more sophisticated and use broader vocabulary and things like that. So that is, as a case study, I don't necessarily think that's the most efficient method, but it's very interesting to understand that it's actually possible for an adult to learn exactly the way a child does, given an optimal environment where they have native, very entertaining, engaging, comprehensible input.
So that kind of brings up the question, the environment and also the timeline. Most people, or a lot of people that are learning Japanese now, are also working, or they are at school but for something else. So you fill in the gap, you put like an hour here, an hour there, maybe an hour every day. But then suddenly that total immersion feels like it's not applicable because you're not totally immersed, and it's just little bits and pieces here, and progress is suddenly diluted and feels...
So that's the thing, is that environment, there's a lot of things about that environment that most of us don't have access to, right? Like, one is that it's not on video. These aren't pre-recorded videos, right? The native speakers are actually there in front of you in his classroom that when he did this, and they're looking at the students. They can see whether the students are understanding or not based on their facial reactions, right? And if they're not understanding, they're gonna do something to clarify what was just said, right? They're not gonna move on to the next thing until they can tell they've understood, right? And just the fact that it's in person, in real time, right in front of your eyes, I think makes it more engaging, right? You don't have that problem of like, I start zoning out, right? Like, it's easy when you're just listening to a podcast to zone out, but when there's a real life person interacting with you and kind of, like seeing whether you understand or not, it's a lot easier to have your attention stay focused on it, right? And yeah, just the time and everything, right? So we don't have that environment, but there's different aspects that we can replicate of it, right? So the reason I originally kind of brought that up is because now there's basically people trying to recreate similar content, but in the form of basically YouTube videos.
Okay.
And so like there's one service now that I can definitely vouch for, because a lot of people in my community that I run use it and have really good results. There's this service called Comprehensible Input Japanese, and they basically have created hundreds of hours of this comprehensible input content where it's sorted into different levels, and at the beginning levels you can watch it, and due to the visuals and the images they put on the screen, and of course they're speaking in a simplified, slow way, you can just start picking up Japanese pretty much just by watching these videos. And I have a couple students now that have basically went from 0 to like an upper intermediate level, doing nothing but just watching these videos for a couple hundred hours.
Interesting. Over
the course of a couple months. So now that that's a thing, I think that's like my number one recommendation is like start doing this. Probably don't only do that, and probably mix it with kind of the method I did. Like right now I'm personally studying Chinese. I'm doing like a hybrid. Like there's also a lot of these similar videos for Chinese just on YouTube where people make lots of content they're just speaking Chinese. They're not explaining grammar. They're not teaching you anything, but they're making it easy to understand what they're saying by visuals on the screen and the context and stuff. So I'll watch a lot of that. And then I'll also just watch Chinese TV shows made for adults, like native speakers. And then I learn words in Anki, and that helped me pick out, some of what I'm hearing in the...
So ultimately, it's a balance. You need a little bit of everything. It's not just one solution solves it all.
I think what's optimal, given what we have at our disposal, is a balance. Yeah.
But even when you reach that balance, it takes time. You mentioned 2,000 hours, an example of the Thai thing. You said in your own experience, it took you multiple years of back and forth between Japan to kind of get to a level. And I'm wondering, if we look online nowadays, since you've now also joined that content creator community for language education, we see a lot of creators, advertising, get fluent in 5 months or get fluent in 2 weeks. How I reached the X level fluency in this amount of time. Do you feel like it skews people's perception of language learning and what it actually means to immerse yourself? And
I mean, I don't think it's something new. I think, I remember being a kid and seeing commercials for Rosetta Stone, right? And on the TV that basically had that same message of like, you can just do this for 15 minutes a day. I mean, the funny thing is, there's kind of two aspects of that advertising. One is that you can do it really easy with no effort. And the other one is it only takes 15 minutes a day.
And both are wrong.
Like, what's that?
Both are wrong.
Well, the funny thing is the easy part can be true if you bump up the volume to like 5 hours a day, every day, right? And have like ideal input, right? Which is, so like that part of it can be true, but it's probably not going to be, because like I said, we don't have that environment. But the thing that's completely non-negotiable in any, no matter what you're going about, is the time. That's the thing. Like when it comes to language learning, I think time is way more important than effort. If there's a lot that like even if you put in, if you're someone like me who put in a lot of effort, I still think most of what you learn is happening kind of spontaneously just through exposure, right? Like a lot of times you learn a word just because you happen to come across a situation that just made it really clear what that word means, right? Or you heard it used in a really emotional scene or in a situation. It doesn't have to be watching content. It could be interactions with native speakers, right? There's a lot of words that I learned through a experience that I had, and then I know that makes it really memorable and I never forget. And so, but it's not that I had to put an effort to it, right? Sometimes you just come across a scene that just makes it so clear what's going on. It's so memorable that it just happens. So it's, since so much of language learning is kind of happening spontaneously through exposure, you need to have, give yourself the opportunities to have that exposure, have that spontaneous circumstance that makes it clear what that one thing means, a lot of the time.
The time, super important. People need to not kind of fall for these ideas of you can learn it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You need to spend the time. Yeah,
I mean, language learning in a way, a lot of ways, is completely ridiculous because, like, in the language learning world, if you're putting in like 3 hours a day, solidly learning Japanese, like I'd say a lot of people in the online community that I run will put in 2 to 3 hours a day. These are busy people that have a family and a job. That's still a huge commitment, right? Like you don't have that many hours after work. And to sort of put in 3 hours, that's a huge commitment, right? In any other hobby, that would be an insane level of dedication, right? But in language learning, that's kind of the minimum to like actually make solid progress towards fluency on the time scale of like a couple of years, So, I mean, I think it's probably good to accept that language learning is completely ridiculous. Like I'm feeling that now learning Chinese, like I'm putting a lot of time towards this and I'm still making, I'm making very solid progress given how language learning works. But I'm thinking like, okay, I've been doing this like a couple hours a day for, 3-4 months now. Like if I had started a new hobby like guitar, I could like play a couple songs on guitar and like show off to my friends. With Chinese, like I can barely do anything because I'm just, that couple hours a day for a couple months is like just, a couple percentage of the way there to fluency, basically.
It's just a little bit. So you developed over time this methodology, started teaching it on Patreon back home.
Yeah.
When was a time where you're like, well, enough of this, I want to move back to Japan?
Yeah, I mean, it was, so let's see, I started making YouTube videos kind of full time and doing Patreon in like late 2017. And I moved to Japan in 2022 in the middle. So yeah.
So that was probably shortly after the borders reopened during
COVID,
it
was pretty much, actually, because I initially came on a student visa, it was back before tourists could come. So initially it was really nice because I had that period where the only foreigners there were people that actually had a visa and were living there. And so the Japanese people knew that you weren't a tourist and they'd, give you the benefit of the doubt more when it came to like whether you know what's going on, But yeah, I mean, there were a couple different things that kind of came together. Like I was 27 when I moved to Japan. So I think I was, when I was around 26 when I guess I started thinking seriously about moving to Japan. So, I entered my late 20s and kind of, thinking about, okay, what does the next stage of my life look like? And I kind of felt like my whole life at that time was very online. Like because so much of my life was Japanese, learning Japanese, speaking Japanese, helping other people learn Japanese. Like I had all these friends online, but I didn't have a lot of friends around me in my environment because, I lived in Portland, Oregon, and, when you live in America, it's hard to meet Japanese people. Yeah. It's hard to meet other people interested in Japanese. Wasn't that many. And, I kind of felt this big disparity between like my online life was very fulfilling. And I now had some status in this community. I was able to connect with other creators doing cool things. But then in real life, I had like nothing going on. So I think that was part of it too, of like, maybe if I actually go to Japan, I can actually kind of close that gap between my online life and like my real life.
Your previous experience before that was Gunma, which was difficult for you and left these intense memories, not always pleasant. A few years pass and you've achieved a very high level of Japanese. You come back. Was this like a completely new experience for you?
Oh yeah, I mean, it basically felt like I was coming to Japan for the first time. Like, I mean, yeah, because there was a 10-year gap between that first time in high school and when I came back. So, like, it basically felt like when I think about how long I've lived in Japan, a lot of times now it's almost been 3 years since I moved here, but I forget that I also lived here 6 months, like a long time ago. Like, it feels like a previous lifetime pretty much. So, I mean, yeah, coming here, I mean, obviously being fluent in Japanese changes everything. And also just the fact that I'm an adult and I control my life now. Like I don't have to stay with the host family and go to school. And like back then I had no control over my life and my environment. Now I have total control.
Yeah.
So it's completely different. And yeah, I completely love it.
What are your plans now? You're back here. You are kind of self-established as I would say, solo entrepreneur in a way with your Japanese language education. Still, most of your work is online.
Yeah.
But what's coming next for Matt versus Japan?
Well, so up until now, I pretty much only made content in English for people learning Japanese. And I'd made a couple of videos in Japanese here or there, or made videos with Japanese YouTubers. But now in these last couple of months, I've started to actually make my own content in Japanese.
Cool.
And so I want to start kind of having an online presence in Japanese where I'm not like, what I'm thinking now is for my English audience, like what I've been doing up until now, I pretty much exclusively talk about language learning. I don't really talk about, my opinions on the world at large or, my personal life that much. Whereas for my Japanese audience and this kind of new, online presence that I'm building for like in Japanese, I also want to talk about language learning because these ideas that I've been talking about of immersion learning are still pretty much unknown in Japan. But I also maybe want to talk a little bit more about my perspective as being a foreigner in Japan, because I feel like that's actually something worth sharing. Like when I was in America, I'm just a normal American guy. I don't feel like I have anything interesting to share with other Americans about America or whatever, right? But in Japan, I think a lot of people are interested in like, well, you understand both cultures, or at least you have a lot of experience in both cultures. What do you, how do you view things? What do you experience?
Sharing perspectives and also all this methodology for a lot of Japanese people probably eager to learn English or other languages for that matter too.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think up until now, and it's still very true, like most Japanese, like learning English in Japan is a huge industry.
It is
like it's very saturated in a lot of ways, but it has a very strong focus on passing tests like TOEIC.
Memorizing.
Just
I see them on the train every day with their red little ruler going through the vocabulary list, and sometimes I look over the shoulder and I'm like, why are you learning that word? What are you going to do with it?
But for them, if that's what's on the test, maybe that's the best thing they have to do, But I think more and more there's an interest in not just passing tests, but actually I actually want to be fluent in English. I want to be able to express myself. I want to be able to understand English information and content, or go abroad and actually interact with the locals and stuff like that. And so that's what I want to cater to. Like, I've never been interested in tests myself. I understand sometimes if you have to pass a test and that's for your career or whatever, do that if that's what you need to do. But I'm not interested in, that's not what excites me, is thinking about how can I pass the test, right? I'm actually interested in how do we get as close to as possible to functioning like a native speaker in the foreign language. So yeah, now that it seems like a really good time because there's more Japanese people actually interested in that.
So many exciting things coming for you here in Japan. Hopefully. I have one more question actually relating to language learning, because you brought it up earlier. You mentioned that the methodology is also how language learning models have been trained. What's your take on the development of AI in the field of language learning? Is it going to have perhaps negative effects because it's getting so easy to have things translated in real life with voice, and you don't need to speak a language as much as perhaps before? You can look up words, you can have the AI write the emails.
I don't really think so. Like, first of all, if you are a language learner, AI is an amazing tool. Like for me, it's the best possible dictionary ever. So when I'm now learning Chinese, the only dictionary I really use is ChatGPT, basically. I have an Anki add-on where it will use the OpenAI API to, I have a prompt that I use to generate the definitions. So instead of just when you look up a Japanese word in a lot of people use jisho.org, right? There's a lot of these dictionaries people use if they're, they speak English and learning Japanese. And what those dictionaries are, a lot of times they're more like a thesaurus than a dictionary, right? It's just listing English nouns or English words that kind of mean similar to what the Japanese word means. But like I said, a lot of Japanese words, they don't mean the same thing as any one English word. They have a unique nuance that can't be, equivocated with one specific English word. And sometimes getting that idea of this English word means this Japanese word can actually be actively harmful, because then you project that onto the input that you get. Really common example is the word dokushin in Japanese. When you look it up in all the common Japanese to English dictionaries, the first definition listed is single. So a lot of Japanese learners get that idea. They read that and they're like, okay, so dokushin means single. What dokushin actually means is that you're not married. It means that you're like a bachelor, basically. So single can have that meaning, right, on like, legal forms, but people assume that it means that they're not in a relationship. So people will say like, hey, do you have a girlfriend right now? And they'll be like, no, I'm dokushin, right? Which doesn't make any sense, right? Because even if you had a girlfriend, you'd still be dokushin, right? But because they have that idea in their head, it's hard to notice that. Once you get that kind of misconception in your head, sometimes, eventually, if you get enough input, you'll realize that it's not the same. But it can take a really long time. So, if you, instead of using that dictionary, you just say to ChatGPT, explain what this word means without just giving me a direct translation. Then it will say, oh, dokushin means that you're not married. And if you learn it that way, well, now you just avoided all the mistakes and stuff like that. So I think for that, it's really good. Also, if you're ever just stumped on a sentence and you're like, what does this mean? What is the grammar going on here? ChatGPT is really good at that. There's even also people in my community now that are using it for speaking, because it will, if you can get the right prompt, it will give you brutal feedback on whether you're saying things that are grammatical or not, which, normally you'd have to pay for. Now you can do it as much as you want, and it's not going to work. You can tell it to not worry about hurting your feelings and stuff. So as a language learning tool, it's like totally incredible. There's also things like you can use it to try to generate comprehensible input. Like if you've seen Notebook LM, how there's this service, there's this feature where you can like upload a PDF and it will make a podcast of two people talking about the content of the PDF you uploaded.
No, I've never heard. I will have to check.
Yeah, it's a Notebook LM it's one of Google's new things that put out. So you can like upload a whole textbook and it will just, in like 5 minutes generate a 30-minute podcast of two people talking about the content in like everyday language. So there's people in my community that are doing that for Japanese. Like they'll actually upload, like someone in my community took one of my own videos in English about language learning, and they downloaded the script and they uploaded it, and they said, and then it told it to make a Japanese podcast about my thing. And there's these two AI voices. You can still tell they're AI, but they're getting really, really good, right? Like their pronunciation's like 99% perfect, and all the grammar is totally natural. And so, it's now even for input as well, you can use that to make comprehensible input and fill that gap as well. So yeah, for language learners, it's amazing. In terms of the other thing you said of like, is it going to make people not even want to learn languages anymore? I mean, like I was talking about, if you want to get really fluent in a language, it's a huge commitment, right? Like thousands of hours. So I don't think anyone's ever gotten really good at a language purely out of obligation in the first place.
No,
right?
You need to be obsessed about it, in the words of Ananya, who also talked about her experience, just like obsess and yourself as well.
Yeah, kind of, totally. Like the only people that are really going to take it far anyway are people that they're not, being moved by necessity. They're being moved by passion. And I think that like, even with those translators, there's always like, especially if we're talking about Japanese and English, right? The word order is different. So a lot of times you can't even start properly translating a Japanese sentence into English until you've heard the end of the sentence, right? Which automatically means there's never going to be true 100% full-time translation, right? It's not a limit of the technology. It's a limitation of the differences in the language themselves, right? And so I think people are always going to, have a desire to connect with other humans. And there's going to be people that have that desire to like actually understand the original. And in fact, already for a long time now, like even without AI, like if you're just talking about being practical, then really you just need to learn English, right? The whole world is kind of operating in English now. Like it's very rare cases that learning a language other than English is truly going to give you like economic opportunities and for people in the first world now. So yeah, I think already language learning has been mostly driven by passion for a while. And for that reason, I don't think AI is going to change that too much.
Well, thank you for your thoughts on that. And we'll be looking forward to more of your content in Japanese, maybe some more comprehensible content for Japanese learners. They can see another side of your life here in Japan. Matt, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Do you feel like we covered your methodology pretty well? Was there anything important that we left out in our conversation?
I mean, let me think. I guess the one thing that I'd want to say is that if you feel like you don't have enough time for learning a language, maybe you don't. But maybe you do, if you really kind of look at your schedule and find ways to make use of all the time that you do have. And there's a lot of people in my community that I run that have full-time jobs and have, a family and have kids. and still are able to put in like 30 plus hours a week into language learning, sometimes 40 hours a week, because they're really, if you really are dedicated, you use like your commute to work, and you use all the free time you have after work and before bed, and if you really want to make it happen, you can make it happen. So, I also try to be empathetic with people's situations, because obviously you can't. I was very lucky that I was a high schooler with all the free time in the world, but there's also other people like making it happen. So if you really want to make it happen, even if you're busy, I would still encourage you to say you can do it. You can do it.
Matt, thank you. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back again soon. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.